Minister's watch. Above all else, what this is about, what this scandal is about, is what the Prime Minister knows about this interference, when he first learned about it, and what he did about it or failed to do about it. And so far, Madam Chair, there is absolutely no evidence that the Prime Minister has done anything meaningful in response to Beijing's interference in the 2019 and 2021 elections. By all indications, he has instead turned a blind eye to this interference in our elections and in our democracy. CSIS advised the Prime Minister, including in a January 21st, 2021 briefing, that the policy of the government in response to foreign interference be grounded in sunlight and transparency. In response to these troubling reports of election interference, the Prime Minister has done exactly the opposite of what CSIS advised. Instead of providing sunlight and transparency, the Prime Minister has refused to answer basic questions about what he knows. Following the November 7th Global News report by Sam Cooper of a vast campaign of interference by the Chinese Communist regime in the 2019 election that, among other things, involved 11 candidates. The Prime Minister, following that, was silent for 2 weeks. He said nothing. Then he, using carefully crafted language, tried to mislead the Canadian public by saying that he was not briefed about candidates that received money from China, as if Beijing wrote a check to 11 candidates. No one alleged such a thing. Such a thing on its face is absurd. It was if there's anything that's transparent about this Prime Minister, that was a transparent attempt on the part of the Prime Minister to hide, to misdirect, to cover up, and to mislead the Canadian public about what he knows. When he was called out on that, the Prime Minister, despite repeated questions about whether he was briefed, what he knows, has never provided a clear answer. Following the Globe and Mail's recent report by Robert Fife and Stephen Chase about Beijing's interference in the 2021 election, instead of being transparent about what he knows, instead of expressing concern about this reported interference, the Prime Minister's response was to shamefully go after whistleblowers at CSIS for possibly shining a light and making the public aware of Beijing's interference, something that CSIS precisely advised the Prime Minister. Transparency, shining a light, making the public aware. And he went after whistleblowers. He even went so far as to outrageously insinuate that those of us on this committee and others who want to get to the bottom of Beijing's election interference are somehow undermining democracy. I say that a Prime Minister who misleads, misdirects, and covers up election interference is the one who is undermining democracy, not those who want to get to the bottom of foreign interference by Beijing. he smugly attacked the accuracy of the Globe and Mail report of Robert Fife and Stephen Chase, both well-respected journalists, only to kind of backtrack the very next day and say that he had been, what he said, that he was somehow misunderstood. The Prime Minister's non-answers, his repeated evasions, his attacks on whistleblowers are not the actions of a transparent Prime Minister. They are not the actions of a Prime Minister who is interested in getting to the bottom of Beijing's interference. They are the actions of a Prime Minister who has failed to act, who turned a blind eye and is now trying to cover it up. The need for the Prime Minister to come clean and tell Canadians what he knows is underscored by the shocking global news report by Sam Cooper that was reported last Friday, in that report, it was stated that CSIS warned, quote, senior aides from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office, end of quote, that a Liberal candidate in the 2019 election and now sitting Liberal MP was assisted by Beijing's Toronto consulate in his nomination campaign. And instead of taking the warnings of CSIS seriously, they, being the senior aides in the Prime Minister's office, did nothing about it. They turned a blind eye. When the Prime Minister was asked just an hour or two ago whether he had been informed, whether he had been briefed about CSIS's warning that a Liberal candidate, now sitting Liberal MP, was assisted by Beijing's Toronto consulate in his nomination campaign, he refused to answer. He misdirected again, tried to change the subject, tried to attack those who are demanding answers, who are seeking to get to the bottom of this interference. Again, the conduct and the actions of a Prime Minister who is not transparent. They are the actions and conduct of a Prime Minister who has something to hide and who has a lot to answer for. And so, given the seriousness involving these latest allegations reported by Global News, it is imperative that at the very least, the Prime Minister's top aide, the most powerful unelected official in government, his Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, appear before this committee. As the Prime Minister said in 2015, when you're talking to Katie Telford or Gerald Butts, it's like talking to me. You're talking to me. This is someone who is a critical witness in terms of getting to the bottom of what, again, I stress is the heart of this scandal. What did the Prime Minister know? When did he know it? And what did he do about it or fail to do about it with respect to Beijing's interference in two elections, the 2019 election and the 2021 election, under his watch as Prime Minister? Ms. Telford needs to come clean and tell this committee and tell Canadians about what she knows about this CSIS briefing and explain why senior PMO staff turned a blind eye to CSIS warnings about Beijing's interference in our democracy, to explain why she may be one of those senior PMO staff who turned a blind eye. We need to know. And for this committee to be able to do its work, to get to the bottom of Beijing's interference, we need to see the production of relevant documents. The production process so far has been inadequate. At this committee's meeting last week, I highlighted the inadequacy of this, showing that we have received pages and pages and pages of production that are blank pages. It's why I put forward a motion that the parliamentary law clerk, who is independent, undertake redactions having regard for national security considerations. And that motion was gutted last week by the Liberals. Why was it gutted? Because almost certainly doing the bidding of the Prime Minister's office, the Liberals didn't want transparency. The Liberals were quite content to see pages and pages and pages of blank pages. The Liberals wanted to do the redacting themselves, even though it's this Prime Minister who is implicated, along with his staff, in this interference scandal. The Liberals, didn't trust and don't trust the parliamentary law clerk because, again, they're not interested in getting to the bottom of what happened. They're interested in seeing the Prime Minister's inaction and what he knows covered up. And so this motion does provide, once again, that the independent parliamentary law clerk undertake the redactions, and that would ensure that national security considerations are protected, while at the same time providing as much transparency as possible so that this committee can do its work. And so with that, I'm hopeful that the Liberal members opposite will stop doing the bidding of this Prime Minister and his PMO and do what is right in shining a light on Beijing's interference in our elections. And that starts with not shielding, but bringing to committee PMO officials like the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and seeing an independent and transparent production process. Thank you, Madam Chair.